Hello and welcome to the AI Cloud and Modern Workplace Conference 2024. We are delighted to have you and we hope to enjoy all these amazing sessions that we saw in a couple of hours. We have a very exciting agenda for all of you all these 3 days with speakers from different backgrounds and perspectives who will share their insights and experience on how AI and cloud computing is transforming the way we work and we live. Now we have a presentation about a sector that we got too many messages about this sector. Everyone asked us about why don't you make a presentation about security, which is a very, very important in our work life. So we are honored to have with us today a very, very special guest. He's an excellent professional with many years of experience and contribution to the community because he's Microsoft MVP. He has excellent knowledge in cybersecurity. He is a pioneer in the field of security, of course, and he's mastermind. And I met her today, but I heard from the co-organizer, George, the best for our next speaker. Let me introduce you Peter Gillen, Microsoft's most valuable professional in security and managing consultant. Peter, I would like to express my immense appreciation for your presence in our conference. You are the first presentation in security. That's why we are very happy. And we are expecting to collaborate closely in the future with your presentation and your valuable help in security because you protect us. Welcome.
Thanks, Konstantinos. Thanks for the introduction. So, yeah, I took it a bit of a different approach for today. As usual, as you might have seen in the other sessions, it was quite technical, but from the years of experience I've had, I thought it might be a good idea to provide a bit of a top 10 of action items, actually, to quickly get your Azure and cloud environment secured. Yeah, we only have a 45 minutes more or less, but at least I will give you some hints and backgrounds. I took a bit of a different approach than the pure technical one because since a few years, one of my daily jobs, or at least frequent jobs, is auditing environments, so doing the security audits. And over the last few months, years, actually, I found out quite some common mistakes, and actually the top 10 I will be presenting to you today is a bit the famous top 10, or the bad practice top 10 in that sense. And if you consider this, certainly looking into the best practices, it should be fairly easy to solve them. Just to be clear on the presentation itself, it's not a practical guide in the sense that I will not deep dive in the next sessions actually how to completely secure your Azure, but at least you should have some interesting starting points and at least get the best practices out of it to get started and to cover actually your security in a very easy way, right? So as Konstantinos already mentioned before, I'm going a bit too fast here, but you can quickly find me on LinkedIn, as Konstantinos also mentioned. I try to evangelize security, identity management already for quite a long time, and very active on LinkedIn, which is one of my professional dashboards or voice actually to do so next to my blog, but I will come back to that one at the end. So have a look at it. Yeah, very important. What I wanted to give you from the security audit perspective is what can you do. One of the things before I start talking about all these things that you can do is first of all make a bit of an explanation what security is. It might sound stupid, but in most of the cases, and certainly if you're talking to technical people, they might think that security is all about software and hardware. But one of the other components, the people management and the process management, is usually forgotten. And you will notice, in essence, that to secure your environment, and certainly within cloud, it's quite important actually to take all three components. And in essence, security, you can't manage it with the right people, so you need to take care that you have people managing the environment, taking care of it, thinking about it on a daily basis. And very important, you need to explain to them, and they need to document actually the environment to make sure that everyone can help out and that you can work together to secure the environment. So it's quite important to understand that security is actually an ideal combination of three components, both the technology as to people management, as to process management, and that's one of the things which is quite essential to understand. Another part that I usually discover while doing the audits is that in many cases, certainly talking from technician to technicians, they think, well, we need to secure the environment from a practical level, from an operational level, but in many cases, they need to get support from the managers, and certainly it's quite important to understand also you need to get the budget, you need to get the resources actually from top management. And one of the main reasons I also put together this slide is that certainly in the next few weeks, if not months, there will be an increase in legislations that will force you actually to secure your environment. So the European legislation, for example, is boosting in that sense. I didn't talk about the legislation itself, but it's quite important to follow up. For example, ENISA, the Cyber Act, and by October, for example, the NIS2 legislation, which is the essential legislation for critical infrastructure on cybersecurity, that will force companies with some essential societal responsibilities actually to take cybersecurity precautions. And I hope at least with these teams, this 10 steps I will provide you today, then you can get started, but it's not done and over yet at that moment. Have a look at it, think about it, and maybe in the later sessions, and certainly on my blog, you will see some more posts actually what you should take care of the next few months to get at least compatible with the new legislation in that sense. But an important point here, it's not a task of the technicians only. Make sure that your manager is with you, that the departments in the company are with you, and that you certainly the directors team and the main responsible of your company is held accountable for the security. If not, it will be barely impossible to keep up with good security, right? One of the important things is also where lies the task in the management team. Again, you will see that as what was known before from GDPR, that you should hold them accountable. They need to support you to implement the best practices. They need to lead by example in many cases. One of the typical things that's usually forgotten from a management team is that security needs support, security needs planning, and to avoid that you're actually extinguishing small cyber fires in that sense, you need to the resources to do so. Very important is also, and I will explain later on, in many cases people think that security has a basic budget, you install it and then should be fine, but you will see that security is a continuous job on a daily basis, so it's quite important to implement security as a process. One of the things you might frequently hear is the PDCA, or the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. The purpose of that one is that you think before you do, that you set up a plan, that you've in the next sequence check what you're doing, do some measurements, do some dashboarding, and then based on the results you improve the systems continuously. One other reason to implement this PDCA cycle is also taking it step by step, small steps. Don't overdo it. So don't try the big bang, because in most of the cases it will get quite complicated, while cutting up the jobs in small parts, it's way easier actually to get successes, and then you can use the successes in the comp to explain how security works and to increase the security gradually, right? So continuously improving the security is quite important, and we will explain later on also that your environment and security is continuously changing. The techniques on attacks is continuously changing. So it's not sufficient to implement security once, but actually you need to maintain it on a continuous basis. That's a quite important part, right? On the other hand, although that we're looking into cloud environments, there are quite some items that you need to check, and even in the cloud, you need to take care of multiple components, not only devices, not only servers, not only network, but please be aware that you need to be listing actually all the devices using the databases. Is quite important to have an overview of the devices and the assets that you're using. An asset, in essence, is any data, any system, any person in your company that's valuable to protect, and getting an overview on that one on a continuously basis will help you a lot actually to know what to protect. In many cases also, if you know, for example, if there are any vulnerabilities published, you can check your list of assets and then make sure that you properly update these devices and systems and applications to do so. One of the main processes, certainly with security, is identity and access management. It's not simply creating users and giving them access, but also making sure that if they change jobs, if they leave the company, that actually access is being changed or removed in many cases. And that applies also to system and network security, obviously. Due to the continuous movement of security, it's also quite important to use your asset list to set up a secure configuration, which is also called a secure baseline, and the minimum requirements that you want to use. While we're having a chat right now, also on cloud security, also physical security is quite important. Please be aware that next to the Microsoft Cloud and on a global scale, many of these data centers will still require some physical security, and it's your main responsibility, your accountability as a customer to assure that physical security is set up. Of course, it's quite difficult to oppose or to set the security by Microsoft, but I will show you that Microsoft has taken precautions in that sense by, for example, certifying their data centers, and you can check. So this should be also one of the things once you're moving to cloud, want to assure that security is set up correctly, that you quickly check the environment. And that's exactly the point that we want to check out, which is the 10 red flags that we will check. One of the things which also will take care of, will require a continuous attention, is threat and vulnerability management. So crime is continuously moving. You should realize that anything that is human-made, man-made, has some mistakes. People make mistakes in writing configurations, in writing software, in writing code. So you should be aware that you should be continuously scanning vulnerabilities and trying to patch them as soon as possible. You should pay a lot of attention also to application security, which we will not cover today in detail, but it's a quite important process all the time in cloud, at your data center, at your computer, even at your laptop. That's the more technical part, and what I want to pay some attention to today is also on the soft part, in that sense, the process part. So think about policies and procedures and documentation. It's quite important to set your knowledge in documentation that you can share, that you can make sure that the people who are responsible for managing security are acting all the same, and actually consolidating the security to consistent implementation, and it's quite essential to have documentation into that one. Although that you might experience yourself that not a lot of people like to write documentation, it's one of the major items that will save you from misery in the case that you have an attack, or that a DDoS attack or a ransomware attack. So having a fixed and documented configuration will help a lot. One of the basic parts in identity and access management is also HR security. Are you sure that you hire the right people? Check their backgrounds, make sure that you know them very well. So it's quite important, which is one of the essential services to do so. On the other hand, certainly in cloud environments, many of the services are not managed by yourself or by a company themselves anymore, which means you're delegating a lot of security services to suppliers or partners. And in many cases, company go blind, meaning that they trust a partner or supplier to configure their cloud configurations. And yeah, you should better check. There are quite some mistakes, or I will explain later on some default configurations that can be quite dangerous in many cases. And if it goes wrong, you might get some incidents, or even worse case, some disasters in that case. So getting a proper procedures of what if it goes wrong helps a lot, and actually to cover these incidents. In worst case scenario, business continuity, and in that case, of course, cloud can be very helpful to keep your business going, but also having the backups, making sure that you can continue to work in abnormal situations or difficult situations can be very important. So take care of backups. Lots of people trust the cloud blindly, and although that we have seen in the past, in the last few weeks, if not months, that even large providers can make mistakes or wrong configuration. So we had quite some examples of downtime in the cloud. So please be prepared to do so. Don't trust blindly the cloud. Take your precautions and make sure that you can recover your business at any time. So business continuity and disaster recovery is also a very important part actually to take care actually of your data, right? One of the things I wanted to quickly explain also is that security is not a one-time configuration, but it is a process. And I created a small diagram with three main phases, and of course, depending on your situation, it can be a bit more complex. But in essence, it's quite important to understand that the basic process is the onboarding, the change in the offboarding, and people don't realize that in security, actually, the offboarding is the most critical phase. People leave the company. You still need to remove the mailboxes, hand over documents. Handling the contractual obligations is quite a complex task that you need to maintain. Can take a few weeks, if not months, and most of the countries it will take a while before you can exit or you terminate complete termination of the contracts. Pretty similar to IT, removing data is a lengthy process. You need to secure the backups, and you also must make sure that you provide the right company data to other people taking over the jobs, to your boss, and so on. So handing over procedures are quite complex. This, in essence, if you take one step back, if people are changing jobs, you need to hand over actually your current job to your team or someone else replacing you. You need to start up in most of the cases at the main time with a new job. So in changing jobs, you typically take two tasks at the same time, leaving the old job, starting off with a new job. So it's quite important to understand that also changing jobs is quite difficult. By the way, in many cases, you will see that people are accumulating the rights. You wouldn't be the first one keeping all the permissions from the previous job and then moving on and then accumulating, getting the permissions actually of the previous jobs with the current job and then getting more power, which can be quite dangerous over time. For example, if your account gets hacked, the hacker will be extremely happy that he can actually move around with your data. In essence, to put it very simple, the onboarding is the easiest and the less dangerous job. In what happens, for example, if your onboarding procedure fails, you enter into the company the first day of your job, you announce yourself, and then nothing is ready. That's a bit of painful from a social point of view. So getting your first day started without any permissions from security, but from a security point of view, there's very low impact in the procedures, and it is a bit of counter-human in that sense. Most of the implementations and projects about identity management start with the onboarding process, then they move over to the change process, and last but not least, they actually tackle the end of life process, so the exiting process. But from a security point of view, one of the best advices actually is to start with the exit process. Check the people that should have left the company, check their accounts, remove them, block them, make sure that the passwords are changed, remove the accesses to secure your environment. So from a security point of view, it's the best to start at the end of the cycle and then work backwards actually to the beginning, right? So the question here is I want to ask is how you are doing. So I want to challenge a bit actually the best practice in that sense. So ask a few questions, have a look at that one. But even more importantly, within cloud, it's extremely important to ask the other question: is how is your customer or your supplying doing? Meaning that if you provide services or you as a consultant are working for a customer, is how can you quickly check and how can you assess in essence, in effect, how the environment is. On the other way around, if you delegate services, so you hire a supplier or a contractor to do the job for you, what are the typical checks you should do without going too much in details? It's sometimes difficult to be the expert, but what I wanted to provide you with this session is to give you some ideas and to give you some quick checks that you can check how your security is doing. Of course, there's more things to do. At the end of the section, I will provide you with some interesting links how to secure Azure and how to implement best practices, right? One important thing, how to check the environment is by monitoring, by auditing. As I mentioned already at the start today, what I will give you a bit of hints of tips is the auditing perspective for the simple reason that you are responsible as an owner for monitoring. So in essence, the performance monitoring is your responsibility, and very important, it's focusing on the current performance, the current security on a continuously basis, so almost a daily basis. And that's the responsibility and accountability of the owner of the data and the owner of the platform. Meaning, if you buy a license on Azure, you need to check your data on a daily basis. But in most of the cases, as a customer or a supplier, you don't always have access, and in that case, an audit can be very interesting. You can ask a few smart questions, and the main purpose is to check, okay, do you comply with the current standard of security? Do you comply with the security requirements that have been set? Very important difference with the auditing is that in contradiction to the monitoring, which is almost a continuous and daily job, the auditing perspective, you only do it once a year, for example, or at the moment you need it. For example, in case of a data breach, in case of a DDoS attack, or in case of an incident, you can go check actually what the compliance is, how the configuration has been checked. And in most of the cases, the auditing happens actually independent from the owner, and one of the base principles in auditing is actually you should not never audit yourself. So there's a distinct role between monitoring and auditing, between auditors and owners. And one of the important things you should also realize, also from a legislative point of view, auditing will become more and more important. Remember that in GDPR, for example, there are quite some settings you need to respect how to protect the data. That will happen on the same way in the next few weeks. Also on European level with the Cyber Act and the NIS2, so then the NIS directive, there will be quite some recommendations and requirements from a legal perspective to control and to make sure that you manage the security. And as a customer or as a supplier, for example, you can do that by audits, right? Just a quick information on what kind of audits you can have. First of all, if you do the audit yourself, you can ask someone, for example, an auditor or one of the teams to do the internal audit, and then actually you're doing the audit within the internal company. Typically, it's an auditor or the governance and compliance team that will check. Of course, you can always ask actually an external freelancer, for example, to do the internal audit, but very important, it stays within the company and you get the reporting yourself. You can then use the feedback of the internal audit and the reporting to improve your systems. It's different as monitoring, as I explained to you, but where the audit comes in very handy in most of the cases is an audit from one party to another, and which is called a second party audit, in the condition that there is a possible relation, a financial or commercial relation between two parties. So, for example, if you want to buy a solution, for example, you can audit the supplier or ask for an audit and check how well he manages the security. So you're not owning the supplier's solution, but you're going to be a customer or have the intention to become a customer. Then you can ask a few technical or security questions to the supplier and see how he reacts in many cases. The other way around, also as a supplier, you can audit your customers. For example, if you want to offer a solutions and before onboarding the customer, you want to make sure that the customer has implemented the basic security requirements. You can do a basic audit to estimate what the effort will be to manage that customer's environment. Very typically, suppliers in security operations centers, so SOCs, for example, or SIEM solutions, will do an initial assessment at the customer and then provide the customer with a report, for example, with some improvement plans or basic security implementations. Or in worst case scenario, your bill will go up to implement some basic securities. And I will come back to that one in the 10 red flag actions actually that we will discuss later on. An important part actually is a third party, also called the external audits. And there's one major advantage on having these third party audits is that you get a certificate. So in a certification with a certificate, you can show that certificate, for example, to your customers. And you will see that, for example, if you look into the website at Microsoft, that there is quite some information on the certification of the Microsoft Azure environments, including ISO 27001, which is worldwide recognized actually as a security standard. Without giving access to the environment, you can explain to the customers, hey, these are the procedures we follow. We implement continuous improvement in security. So the certificate actually will give trust to your customers, to your partners, actually, that security is okay, and then you can actually safely use and securely use the environment. Right. Very important, the internal audits is a sort of self-validation. So it is an audit within the company. One important thing is the owner should never audit itself. So very typically it will a DPO or a security officer or an independent department within the company that is doing the audit. Still the reporting is done within the company, and there is no forced publication to external parties. The disadvantage in that sense, there is no official published certificate. Still, you can use that report also as evidence, for example, to customers, or in worst case scenario, to the authorities in case of a data leak or in case of a cybersecurity incident, as a proof that actually you did some auditing and improvement plan implementations. But still, in the essence, the internal audit reporting stays within the company information, right? The audit type from the second party, so the mutual audits and between customers and suppliers, might be quite interesting. Still, there is some contractual dependence between the parties, but you will see that actually the second party audit is a quite important part of due diligence. So the responsibility of your management team to prove security in many cases, and very important, a second party audit or a mutual audit usually happens, for example, in the acquisition. So if one company is buying another one, there will be a due diligence or a check of the financial status, the proper management of the company, and in that case a mutual audit might be quite interesting. It might be also very important, for example, if you delegate a certain application of security, or if you want to delegate security management to a vendor, and to make sure, for example, that they educated the people, that they have provided proper services, that they have documentation, for example, and then a second party audit might be very helpful in many cases. Right. As mentioned, a third party audit, very important. There is independence between both parties. So you will need to ask for an independent certification company, which is called also an auditor company. So we have different positions. They are independent from one another. So there is no, except for the audit itself, there is no commercial relation for other consulting and services. Even for certified audits and accredited audits by the ISO standards, for example, example, there's an explicit segregation of duties, so it's not allowed, for example, to offer audits and consulting at the same time, or together, or before and after. So they need to be very much independent, and for that reason, like for example ISO certification, it can be quite important. And that's exactly what I wanted to explain during this session, is what is the benefit of doing this. And I've been doing these audits for a few years now, and I wanted to share a bit of the points learned within sort of top 10, and that helps you out actually to secure your environment in a basic way. Of course, there's more things to secure, but at least you get started with some basic security, right? It's very important to understand there's a major advantage in auditing, so you don't manage the system on a daily basis. You can have a snapshot of the situation as is. That's also the disadvantage. You don't know what happened before, or you don't know what happens after the audit. It can change over time, but at least you get a basic snapshot. And if you take some basic principles into account, you can get a good idea actually how the situation is, but still it's a snapshot of that situation and it might change over time. Very important audit is also risk-based. So you will check a few favorite items based on the possible risks, or basically of the hot points of security in many cases. So you can't check everything with an audit, because then you would spend a lot of time at the environment, and that's not the purpose. So the main advantages of audits, you can slim down actually the audit time, but still based on some favorite functions, red flags, and that's the reason I wanted to show you today. You can have a look at it and then still have a good estimate in many cases what the situation is. Very important also, the audit reports will help you actually to improve, and one of the basic ISO principles, so the ISO 27001, is continuous improvement. So the purpose of the audit is to help you out to pinpoint the critical points, and in essence we were going to provide you with some points of improvements, and then you can use that information actually to continuously improve. And that's also one of the reasons that you should do on a regular basis audits. Can be both internal or external audits, but you have an independent view on the situations, and most of the cases where that independent view of the external specialists or freelancers, people from outside environment who are independent, you can actually detect the red flags. By the way, more and more we see also that pen testing is part of it. So scanning the vulnerabilities of the environment, then testing if these vulnerabilities could harm you, or to what extent these vulnerabilities could be exploited. Although that you might see that most of the cases the pen testing is separated from the actual audit, but it can be a major input as a point of a feedback, right? A few things what you should be aware of. Mostly, certainly, users within the first steps, taking the first steps within Azure or Office 365, actually go into the sales channels or the default login page of Office 365. So Microsoft and any vendors will actually invite you to register immediately, and usually also with a test license. What actually happens in the background, that first user is also the default admin, and you log in with your personal details. You might log in with the default domain, but also very important, in the first step you get full administrative mode, right? And it is usually also a sort of full God mode that you get, including having all the administrative functions in your Azure and in your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 environment. So you better take a step back before you do this. So think well, again, plan, do, check, and act first before you actually start registering yourself into a new environment. Better take a special account. Don't provide it with an email address, but use it as a login without this special access, and isolate it. So think about creating a special admin account first before you start logging in or creating new accounts actually in your cloud environment. By preference, although for commercial reasons might not always be easy, but you better think of creating an email account and later on disable the email address, so that you can still log on, and by preference also with multi-factor authentication, so not only user ID and password, but multi-factor authentication using the Microsoft Authenticator or the hardware tokens. I will discuss it in a minute. So think first before you log in. That's one of the prime conditions actually you should think about. By the way, also if a provider you're onboarding, ask them about it, how the onboarding procedure is being done. I'll come back actually also as I talked earlier on the exit mode, right? Another point, it sounds obvious, but in lots of audits, I still see that the user ID and the password is still the default mode. People are scared actually to enable the multi-factor authentication, but nowadays with the current applications, you can actually safely register the account by adding also secondary attributes, meaning alternative login, even a mobile number, whatever. And in case you forget the access or the access is not working anymore, including Azure and Office 365, you will see there's a recovery mode. Set up a user ID and password at the first login for your first administrator. Yeah, I should change a few things here, but make sure that actually for your first administrators, you immediately activate actually the multi-factor authentications. Nowadays, you will also see that you can use hardware tokens. So also Windows Hello and the Windows Security will help you to do so. It becomes quite more easier to use a default hardware security. And since a few months, actually, also one of the things you can consider is using passkey. So getting your device or your phone being activated as a unique identifier to give access to that one, which makes it extremely difficult, for example, to hackers to get access to your account, and because you own the device, you manage the device that gets access to your environment, right? Another point of view is the default groups and the default roles that you will get. Do not underestimate actually the volume of the groups and the roles that you have by default in Azure and M365. Every single applications in the Microsoft environment has its own roles to get access to a certain level of applications and security. So Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, for example, have their own roles, and in many cases, people tend to add themselves to the global admin or to the admin roles. One of the basic advices here to maintain that security is do not use the default roles as such, but make sure that actually you only add the tasks or the specific roles that you have. So try to avoid that God mode. By the way, it's also in audit mode quite simple and quite interesting to check this. I didn't provide too much details over here, but yeah, have a check of this. So, for example, if a supplier or provider installs your environment, your Azure, do a regular check. Check in who has that default administrator mode. It's far too easy to give that admin mode actually by default, and challenge it. So try to minimize the access. So minimum requirements should be set up. The main reason for that one is if your account gets hacked, a hacker is extremely happy if he gets God mode. He can simply destroy your cloud environment, your Azure and M365 environment. And please be aware that many cases these default groups and administrative roles will also be synchronized to your on-premise environment if you have set up your identity and access management in synchronization with your Azure and Office 365. So there might be a gigantic impact also to your local environment. So please be careful in that sense. In many cases, also people are not prepared to manage their environment in a structured way. So lots of companies start off with basic implementations. They do not think about identity management as a process. And I told you before, actually, that you should think about the 3 levels of process: the onboarding and the getting people access to it, changing people level 2, and offboarding and the exit process is quite important. So think about the processes. One of the typical behaviors that you will see, one of the typical symptoms you will see for ad hoc management, so meaning management on the spot, is that you will see lots of copies of existing users. So in many cases, people that are freshly on board will get a copy of the identity of their colleagues, and you will see a lot of people accumulating these access rights. So they get more power than they should. So a fairly simple solution in this case is setting up a basic identity management and access management solutions. Although for some of these features in Azure or M365, you might need some additional licenses. By the way, some of the E5 or the Azure AD Premium license might be required. You do not require these licenses for all your users within the company. So be smart, have a look at it. In many cases, it's sufficient actually to enable these advanced licenses for the admin accounts only. So actually you can keep the money in your pocket and still have advanced security in many cases. So think about it up front. And anyway, do some basic identity and access management. Synchronize, for example, with HR and make sure that if people are leaving the company, ask HR about it, that they notify you, that actually you also implement actually the same procedure. And of course, if you have still an on-premise Active Directory, you might think about synchronizing your situation, your environment with the on-premise environment. So meaning that you disable the users from the HR or internal environment, it will be automatically disabled from the cloud solution, which is fairly easy, fairly direct, and as soon as the user does not need the access anymore, he should or be removed from the environment, which is quite important. Very important, as I told you, one of the major mistakes is considering security as a static environment. If you do that, you forget about actually that most of the processes within security are moving targets. Again, do some basic definitions. And for example, the slide deck over here, I learned actually from an ISO 9000, which most of people know as a quality management process. Literally in the ISO standard, you will see some basic processes. So if you do a process definition, think about who is managing it, what input do you need, what output do you need, do some basic process, basic definitions. For example, define roles and responsibilities of a user in HR, for example, give them the proper tasks and permissions actually to do so, and then start managing the process. That will help you out a lot, and as mentioned from earlier on, is one of the basic documentation processes, quite interesting to do so, right? Very important in many cases that users get started with an existing first account in an Office 365 or an Azure account, and very typically the user is enabled as God mode. So the single user account you also use to read your mail, to do the daily tasks, is also the admin account. Quite important to know that hackers like this very much, because actually if they're able actually to attack your account or breach your account, they have both access to your account, to your laptop, to the cloud environment. So it's power mode in that case. Just a quick hint in here is, first of all, separate your user and admin accounts and make sure that actually they have a separate password, they're secured with multi-factor authentication, and then you can avoid actually that attacks to your account will delegate the hacker actually to get full admin mode in that case, right? Also the same thing from the technical level. Many admin accounts will still use the same laptop with the access to their mailbox, to access to the personal file. So please be aware that also most of the cases the account has local access, and in worst case scenario even local admin account, and that's very interesting again to be breached with full access. So quick tip, do daily operations with normal user accounts. Nowadays installing Windows is perfectly possible as a user. Then provide on request and with the user account control permissions, you can actually only execute a specific admin task in that case. So keep that practice. The reason is very simple. So if whatever you click on a faulty email or your account gets breached, the hacker does not get that admin access, and actually you can isolate the blast again in many cases. So avoiding actually that you're giving away the full control in your environment, right? One of the other things, and certainly very important also to connecting as an administrator actually to Azure, by default, Azure will offer you an RDP access, although they warn you that it might be not secure. Typical ports, RDP is by protocol not always secure. Still, Azure offers quite some interesting features, like for example a Bastion host, which allows you actually to manage your environment from a distance from a secure device without getting access directly to your laptop. So secure environment, think about network security, and that's the next step I also will explain in the next one. Because one of the most common mistakes is actually using one network, both on premise as in Azure. So what you should do is segment the network by function. So servers versus web servers versus laptops versus system database and so on, which actually will allow you to detect anomalies in the network in that case. So it takes a bit more work in this case. It's a bit more difficult one to get started with this one, but both in Azure as in your physical network, think about segmentations. And also very important, on every border of segment or every virtual network, put in firewalls, put in also host-based firewalls to make sure, by the way, do not disable the firewalls on your laptops, on your servers. That will actually increase the detection of the systems, right? And last but not least, please be aware that you should have one configuration, not have one configuration, but check your configurations over time. It changes over time, user changes. So every time you have a new user on board, a new function being able to recheck your security, please, and use that identity management, right? So these are the best practices that you should do in a very short presentation of 45 minutes. So one else, we will make sure anyway that I will post these references. Have a check. There's quite some interesting posts and availability on the ISO implementations, and of course quite some interesting learning perspectives. So how to do auditing and logging. And you will also see, for example, I've added a few lists. This list is not final yet, but I will provide also on my blog some more information in that one. And also very interesting, if you want to know a bit more about cloud security, you can also, of course, check the learning, but CSA, which is the Cloud Security Alliance, offers also very basic and very good education actually on cloud security. So the ideal way actually to get started with proper cloud security. Right, Konstantinos, that should be it for today. More or less 45 minutes. Here we go.
Dear Peter, I would like to tell you that I'm impressed with your amazing presentation. Amazing presentation. I was waiting. I was expecting. Okay, I heard about SharePoint, that it is my big love, and I have to be honest with you. Sometimes we give a role roles without control all these, but in the future it is a promise. I will try to do your advices. I would like to tell you a big thank for your presence in our summit, in our conference. We all know your valuable help. I advise our audience to follow you and to consult your personal blog, because I know that you are top expert in this category. And I would like to express once again my immense appreciation for your presence in our summit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Have a nice weekend.
Talk to you
And I
later.
hope to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to find a way to get to Greece, right? So thanks, Konstantinos. Thank you for organizing this. So lots of success with the other presentations, and look forward to meeting you. Talk to you later.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.